In today's video, I'm going to be trying out pastel pencils for the first time. The ones I'm using are Faber-Castell's Pitt pastel pencils. I'm going to be using them to create a cat's eye study. So let's get on with the video. So I've started as usual by drawing my line art on a separate piece of paper and then transferring it across to my Pastelmat using Frisk Trace Down wax-free transfer paper. I do this so that I keep my paper that I'm working on as clean as I possibly can do before I start. I'm then using my darker shades of the pastel pencil to block in my darks. As I'm doing that very loosely, as you can see, just to make sure I'm just mapping out where my lights and darks need to be in order for me to complete this portrait. So I'll add more detail later on. At the moment, it's just important for me to know where those lights and darks are going to sit so that I'm not trying to guess what my lines mean later on. If I get it all in now, then I've literally got a map to follow and I just need to add detail over those. Now, the thing I found with these pastel pencils, they are so nice to blend. They're different to the coloured pencils that I normally use. Obviously, they're a completely different product. The blending is so nice. I am being extra messy. I probably wouldn't be this messy in the future. I'm doing what I always do and just seeing what these pencils will do for me and how they'll handle as a bit of an experiment for myself, as I haven't used them before. So I'm sort of still staying in line with what direction the fur should be growing. I could be being tidier, but as I said, I'm seeing how well these blend out and what they do. Obviously, being a pastel pencil, I'm expecting them to blend out pretty well. I did like how these laid down. I really did like the results that I got. And I will definitely be playing a bit more. So now I've got a first base layer down. I'm just setting it into the Pastelmat with my finger. I want you to see how that blended through, and as you see on the Pastelmat, it's not really moving too far, which I liked. I think that's an attribute of the actual Pastelmat itself rather than the pastels. It's kind of keeping the pastel where I want it, but just smoothing everything out, which I liked. I'm using the sepia Pastelmat, the sepia coloured Pastelmat, because I wanted a bit of a mid-tone so that I'm not fighting the white of the paper, especially as this is my first go. And it's nice that some of that can show through, and you can see on those whiter areas, it's adding some depth to that colour already without me even trying. So I'm continuing to just add some more darks. I'm darkening up my darks. I'm making this piece a lot darker than I want it to begin with, because the good thing about pastels is that you can layer the light over the dark, which is a bit of a learning curve for me because I'm used to working with coloured pencils, and the opposite is true there. You want to preserve the white as much as possible. And this is more like when I paint with acrylics. So I'm just mapping out the colours. They don't have to be the exact ones that I want at the moment. They're just close enough to give me an idea of where everything on this cat's face goes and the movement that the fur should be in. You can see already I've got an awful lot of depth starting, and that's with very, very little effort. I'm really liking pastels, which is a shame because I've just bought a whole new set of my coloured pencils, and I think I'm going to have to invest in pastel pencils now as well, because they were really nice to work with. So again, just layering and layering the colours that I want on top. Still just working on the values, just making sure that my darks are black enough and my lights are white enough, just to make sure that the shape of the cat's face is there and I have some form. And when anything's looking a bit harsh, I'm just rubbing it in with my finger at the moment. I will use blending stumps a little bit later on, but at the moment I just want to push everything into that paper. I'm adding a few slight fur strokes now. I've gone down to a slightly lighter colour, a bit more of a pinky, peachy, salmony colour. That's a professional term, pinky, peachy, salmon. I'm not sure what the colour was, but I'm just starting to add some light fur strokes again so I can see where everything's sitting before I'm moving on to the eye. I didn't want to start the eyes first because I wasn't sure how the Pastelmat was going to blend, and if it was going to be a bit messy, I wanted to leave the eyes a bit later on. Like, as I said, I'm not so worried about the colour specifically. I want as close as I can get to the colour, but it doesn't have to be exact at all. As you saw just then in the top corner, it went really quite bright, the yellowy green, and so I just picked up a different pastel pencil and coloured over it, and it wasn't a big deal. In the eye on this cat, I'm trying to keep my pencil strokes in line with what the shapes in the eye are doing. This cat's eye had beautiful light effects going through it from where the light was hitting the eyeball, and I wanted to capture that as best as possible. So in order to do that, like I would have done with coloured pencil, I'm just trying to keep in line with the direction that's going. And the whites of the eyes here definitely weren't white in my reference photo. They were quite a lot darker. So fighting my want to make them really, really light, I've darkened them up. I will lighten over them a little bit later, but I'm staying as true as I can to my reference photo. You just see me there put some paper underneath my hand. That's glassine. It's called glassine. The Pastelmat comes with it in between the sleeves of paper, the leaves of paper, I should say. Nothing sticks to it. It's it's like a grease-proof paper, but it's so much nicer than tracing paper to use. I mean, anything in a storm, if you any sort of paper under your hand is better than having your hand smudging your work. But the glassine I like because nothing sticks to it at all, so you're far less likely to smudge your work by using the glassine. So that's what I'm doing. And you can see I've taped that. That's just because I work upright at an easel because of my back, so I need to tape it on there or it's not going to stay put. So I'm just adding smaller details and using a blending stump in the eye area to really push that colour into the paper and blend it through where I want it to be. And to add the highlights to their eyes, I've used light blues and then gone over them with whites like I do when I'm using coloured pencil. I stuck to the same routine there. It gives it a much glassier look. And as always, I'm making sure under the top eyelid, I'm making that a bit darker because that's where a shadow does sit from the top of the eyelid. So moving on to the other eye now, again, I'm blocking in the lights and the darks. There are so many different colours. And the way the light was hitting this cat's eyes, the right eye was slightly different in colour to the left eye. So I stayed accurate with that as well because I quite liked the different colours that were showing up. So again, it doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason while you're actually drawing. But if you stay true to the reference photo, then it doesn't steer you wrong at all. Obviously, you're not going to be exact, but close enough is good enough, especially when it comes to eyes. The more important thing is to make sure that the pupils are the right shape, the eyes are the right size, and that your highlights are in the right place. If you get all that right, it doesn't hugely matter on if the colours are absolutely exact. Unless, of course, you're doing like a commission or somebody's beloved pet, because then you really do want to make sure that your colours are as accurate as possible. But being as I don't know this cat, I got this image from Pixabay, which gives out royalty-free photos for commercial use and for artists. I've used that image because I like to hype up the saturation a bit in my work, and so I wasn't going to upset any pet owners by slightly changing their cat. But I really wanted to hype up the contrast and the saturation in those eyes as well, because the colours throughout them were beautiful, so I really wanted to show them up. So that's what I've done. So just adding a few more highlights now. I had the darker colours down, now the lighter ones are going over. Again, this is a lot of a learning curve for me because I'm really not used to working this way around. And as you can see there, you can actually sharpen these pencils to a fairly good point. I would recommend using a manual crank sharpener when you're sharpening the points in there. I found the handheld one, they broke a lot more. I had much better luck with my handheld crank. I've got a swordfish icon, I think it is, which I love and worked brilliantly for these pencils. Because when you do sharpen to a sharp point, but do bear in mind they are pastels, they are soft, they will snap if you're not careful. You'll see me do it a few times in this video, I'm sure. but just try and keep a slightly lighter hand when you have sharpened them to a very sharp point. Obviously I wanted the sharp point for the really, really smaller details of like the hair and things like that going through. So I'm just darkening through with my darks with some more hair strokes now, adding a bit more of that sort of black colour I think I'm using there, or a very dark brown. But I noticed that it was looking a bit lighter. Once I got the eyes in, it was looking too light for what I wanted, so I'm just going through and darkening everything up again. Obviously this, as I said earlier, this is much darker than it's going to be at the moment. I want the darks in because then when I put the lights over them, they're going to show through and add an awful lot of depth to the piece and to the face of this cat. So as I'm building these lighter first strokes over that dark, I'm still sticking with the direction of the fur. If you change the direction of the fur too much, you're going to change the form of the face, which you don't want. So you really need to pay attention to that reference photo. Make sure you are following the hair growth. Obviously, every single strand doesn't need to be in the exact same place. It just needs to be approximate, but you do want the general movement of the hair to be going in the right direction. And also notice that as I'm doing this, none of my hairs are straight, they're all slightly curved and they're all overlapping. If you just do straight lines all the way through your fur, it's going to look very fake, it'll look a bit greasy and messy and not right. And so just do make sure that your lines are ever so slightly curved, just slightly, just enough just to give it a slight bend to give it a more natural look, and make sure you are overlapping the hair in the way that it is showing in that photo so that it looks natural. As you can see, I'm getting lighter and lighter with my colours now, following the growth of the hair. Some of the hair grows a little bit haphazardly, and you need those haphazard hairs in as well because they make it look more natural. Because even if you've just groomed your pet, or in the cat's case they've just groomed themselves, they're still going to have the odd wayward hair. So again, pay attention to that, and when you've finished, if it's looking a bit too neat and tidy, add a few of those wayward strands just here and there throughout your piece, and it will make it look an awful lot more natural. So as you can see now, those lighter colours are going on. You can see that the darks that I built up earlier are showing through nicely now, and it's making it look like it's got more form and a lot more depth than it would have done if I'd have just tried to put the whites where the whites go and not added anything underneath them. And the colour of this paper is also helping on the nose area because I've got that nice mid-tone of the sepia, it's not sepia is it, of the sienna showing through. Nice sharp pencils as best you can to get the fur to look like fur. If your pencil's too blunt, it's going to look a bit too thick and chunky and not quite right. What I would say about these pastel pencils, as I said, I do really like them. I would recommend working slightly larger than you would have to, or than you would necessarily on a colour pencil, because the finer details, these pencils don't go as to a sharper point as say a polychromos will. So if you want the really fine details on a really small piece, you're going to struggle a bit more to get them, in my opinion, from what I can tell from this piece. So I might change my mind a bit later on the more I work in pastels, which will be a lot more because I really love this result. But from initial opinions, I think slightly larger than you might normally, so that you can get those details in a lot sharper, because you're not going to be able to get those in with how sharp these points go. They don't go that sharp, and they're quite brittle being that they're pastel. So that would be a recommendation there. So I'm just blending as I go as well. So just because I'm on the final layers really doesn't mean I have stopped blending. I'm still using my finger and using a stump just to push the colour down and blend it together that little bit, soften it in places. because I want this cat to look as natural as I possibly can. And I'm just trying out glazing a bit. I know you can't really glaze in pastels, but I was just glazing a bit just to add a bit more depth to the piece. And now the favourite bit, taking off all that tape to give a nice clean border. And there is my cat. So my final take from all of this is that I really do like those pastel pencils. I really want to buy a much bigger set now after trying this. And this is the second project that I've used the Pastelmat with, and I absolutely love this paper for colour pencils and for pastels. I think that is going to be my absolute go-to from now on. But that's it for this guy. I hope you enjoyed this video.
I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please leave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of any new content that I post. For now though, bye guys.